At the end of this story, you'll discover why one of the most powerful women in modern Christian faith never allowed a specific color to touch her skin during her services. And when you know what that color was, you'll understand why God Himself was protecting her from something terrible. But first, let me tell you about the day Kathryn Kuhlman almost broke her own rule. It was 1972, Pittsburgh. The auditorium was packed, as always, more than 8,000 people, waiting for a miracle. Kathryn was in her dressing room, preparing to go on stage, when her assistant brought a dress that had been sent by a fan. It was beautiful, elegant, perfect for the occasion, but it was that color. Kathryn looked at the dress, and her face paled. Her hands trembled, not from nervousness, from something much deeper, something she had learned decades before, when she was still young and naive in the spiritual world. Have you ever felt a color bother you without knowing why? Like it carried an unseen weight, an energy you can't explain, but you feel it in your soul. Kathryn knew exactly why that color disturbed her, and what she discovered about that color will completely change your perception of how the spiritual world connects with the physical, how God uses even the simplest things to protect us from forces we don't understand. But to understand why Kathryn avoided that color, we need to go back to the beginning, to the moment she discovered it wasn't just a matter of personal preference, it was a matter of spiritual survival. Kathryn was only 22 years old when it all began. She was in Denver, holding a small prayer meeting in a local church. Nothing grand, maybe 50 people present. But that night, something extraordinary happened. Something that would change not only her ministry, but her own understanding of how God's kingdom operates in the physical world. During prayer, a light began to shine around her. It wasn't imagination. People saw it. Photographs were taken. The light was real, tangible, almost solid, and it had a specific color, a color that, from that day on, would become central to her entire ministerial life. Golden, a golden light that emanated directly from her presence, especially during moments of deep anointing, as if God Himself had chosen that luminous frequency to manifest His glory through her. And it was precisely that night that Kathryn noticed something strange. There was a woman in the congregation who seemed restless, agitated, almost aggressive during prayer. Kathryn noticed she was wearing clothes of a specific color, the same color that, years later, she would swear never to wear during her services. When Kathryn approached the woman to pray, something shocking happened. The golden light around Kathryn began to waver, to oscillate, as if it were being interfered with by an opposing force. And the woman, instead of receiving the prayer with gratitude, began to manifest something disturbing. She screamed, not with spiritual joy, with torment. And it was at that moment that Kathryn understood. That color wasn't just a color, it was a portal, a frequency that opened doors to spiritual realities she didn't yet fully comprehend. Have you ever stopped to think that colors aren't just waves of light? That each vibrational frequency can affect not only our eyes, but our souls? That certain colors can harmonize with the divine, while others can open breaches to what shouldn't be present? Kathryn began to study, to research, and what she discovered about that specific color led her to make a decision she would keep for the rest of her ministerial life. In ancient scriptures, this color always appears in specific contexts that reveal a frightening duality. On the one hand, it represents power and royalty. On the other, it's associated with spiritual pride and rebellion against the divine. The color red? Yes, Kathryn Kuhlman never wore red during her services. And now you'll understand why. Red, at its specific vibrational frequency, resonates with the energy of the ego, of personal ambition, of the lust for power that doesn't come from God, but from man himself. And when someone is channeling the divine presence, As Kathryn did, wearing red would be like creating spiritual interference. Imagine trying to tune into a celestial radio station while another frequency, more earthly and egotistical, is vying for the same channel. But there's more, much more. Kathryn discovered that red not only interfered with her connection to the divine, it literally attracted unwelcome spiritual presences to her services, entities that fed on human pride, that strengthened themselves with the energy of personal ambition, and she had proof of this. Over the following years, Kathryn began to observe a disturbing pattern. Whenever someone dressed in red was present at her meetings, the spiritual manifestations became confused, mixed, as if two opposing spiritual frequencies were competing for the same space. People who should have received healing ended up more agitated. Prayers that should have brought peace generated unrest, and the golden light that normally surrounded her became unstable, wavering. That's when she made the most radical decision of her ministerial career. Not only would she herself avoid red, she would instruct her team to do the same. And, whenever possible, she would discreetly ask people arriving dressed in red to cover themselves or change clothes before the service began. You might think this is superstition, but consider this. If God created light and its frequencies, if He is the author of colors and their vibrations, wouldn't it make sense that certain colors could interfere with our connection to Him? Kathryn wasn't being superstitious. She was being spiritually discerning, and the results spoke for themselves. In services where red was absent, the manifestations of healing were more intense, more pure, more clearly divine. The presence of God flowed without interference, like a celestial symphony playing in perfect harmony. But the most impressive discovery was yet to come. In 1975, during a service in Los Angeles, something extraordinary happened that would definitively confirm why Kathryn had made the right decision about red. A woman arrived at the service wearing a vibrant red dress. She had traveled more than 1,000 miles specifically to receive prayer from Kathryn. She was desperate. Her 8-year-old son had been diagnosed with leukemia. Doctors had given him only a few weeks to live. When Kathryn saw her, she felt immediate compassion, but she also felt something else, a spiritual resistance. It was as if an invisible wall was forming between her and the woman. Kathryn tried to pray. The golden light began to manifest around her, as always, but as she approached the woman in red, the light literally retracted, as if it were being repelled by an opposing force. The woman noticed. The people around noticed. Something was preventing the prayer from flowing naturally. That's when Kathryn did something she had never done publicly before. She stopped the prayer. She asked the woman to take off the red coat she was wearing, and she explained before the entire congregation why that was necessary. The red, she said, wasn't just a color. It was a frequency that interfered with the purity of the spiritual connection. It was like trying to connect a sensitive electrical appliance, while another piece of equipment, on the same frequency, was creating interference in the environment. The woman, initially hesitant, decided to trust. She took off the red coat and handed it to a friend. What happened next left everyone speechless. Immediately, the golden light around Kathryn intensified. It didn't just return to normal, it became brighter than ever, as if a spiritual dam had been removed and now the divine presence could flow freely. Kathryn laid her hands on the woman and prayed. The prayer was different, deeper, more powerful. The woman fell to the ground but didn't faint. She was conscious, but completely overtaken by a supernatural peace. And then something happened that no one expected. The woman stood up and said she had received a vision. In her vision, she saw her son in the hospital, but he was no longer sick. He was playing, smiling, completely healed. When she called the hospital that same night, the doctors confirmed the impossible. The tests showed that the leukemia had completely disappeared, without medical explanation. As if it had never existed, the child lived, grew up, became a healthy adult, and it was all because his mother allowed a spiritual barrier, symbolized by the red color, to be removed. Now you might be wondering, why exactly did the red create this interference? The answer lies in the very nature of the color and what it represents in the spiritual realm. Red is the color of blood, of human passion, of earthly fire. It's the color closest to physical, material, dense energy. When someone is channeling the divine presence, which is pure, spiritual, elevated energy, red acts as an anchor that pulls that energy back to the material plane. It's like trying to lift a balloon while someone is holding a rope tied to it. Kathryn understood that her mission was to be a pure channel for divine manifestation, and anything that could contaminate or interfere with that channel needed to be avoided. But there's an even deeper level to this revelation. Red also represents, in the spiritual world, the energy of the ego, of personal will, superimposed on divine will, of human desire competing with God's desire. And when you are praying for divine interventions, when you are asking for the divine will to manifest on earth, having the energy of the ego present is like trying to tune into two radio stations at the same time. The result is only static and confusion. Kathryn knew this intuitively, and so she made the conscious decision to eliminate this interference from her ministerial life. Have you ever noticed how certain colors make you feel differently? How blue calms you, green balances you, white purifies you. This is no coincidence. It's the natural response of your soul to the different vibrational frequencies of colors. And if colors affect our souls, imagine how they can affect our connection with the divine. Kathryn wasn't just avoiding a color. She was creating a spiritually optimized environment so that divine interventions could happen with greater ease and purity. And it worked. For decades, her services were marked by extraordinary healings, powerful divine manifestations, and a spiritual presence that few have been able to match, all because she understood that even something seemingly simple as the color of an outfit can profoundly influence our connection with the sacred. But I haven't finished telling you this story yet, because what happened in the last years of Kathryn's life will reveal an even deeper dimension about the power of colors and their influence in the spiritual world. Pause for a moment. Take a deep breath. Feel the weight of what you've just discovered about one of the most powerful figures in modern faith, because what I'm about to reveal will completely change your understanding of how the invisible world operates through symbols we see every day. It was 1976. Kathryn had just turned 69. Her services still attracted crowds, but she was beginning to feel the weight of age. And it was precisely during this period that she made a discovery that kept her awake for weeks. During a private prayer session at her home, something extraordinary happened. She was wearing her usual prayer attire, a simple white dress, when she had a vision that would forever change her understanding of colors and their spiritual power. In the vision, she saw herself in a celestial garden, but it wasn't an ordinary garden. Each flower, each leaf, each stone had a specific color that emanated its own spiritual frequency. It was as if each color was a musical note in a perfect divine symphony. And then she saw something that terrified her. In one part of the garden there were red flowers, but these flowers didn't sing in the celestial harmony. They created dissonance, interference, as if they were false notes in a perfect song. But the most shocking thing wasn't the red flowers themselves. It was what they attracted. Shadows, entities without a defined form that fed on the dissonance created by the red color. That strengthened themselves with the interference it caused in the celestial harmony. Kathryn awoke from the vision trembling, not from fear, but from understanding. She finally understood why God had guided her to avoid red during her services. It wasn't just a matter of energy interference. It was a matter of spiritual protection. Red, in specific spiritual contexts, acted as a beacon for entities that shouldn't be present during divine ministry. It was like turning on a specific light that attracted unwanted spiritual insects. And then she understood something even deeper. Each color has not only a visual frequency, but a spiritual frequency. And certain combinations of colors, in specific contexts, can open portals between dimensions that should remain closed. Have you ever entered an environment and immediately felt uncomfortable without knowing why? Have you ever noticed how certain color combinations in certain places make you feel uneasy, while others bring you instant peace? Kathryn Kuhlman began to understand that this wasn't a coincidence. In the months following that vision, she intensified her studies on the influence of color in spirituality. She unearthed ancient texts that spoke of the chromatic language of the divine. She found references in completely different cultures that reached the same conclusions about certain colors and their spiritual effects. And she made a discovery that left her speechless. The golden color that always appeared around her during prayers wasn't just a manifestation of the divine presence. It was protection, a spiritual shield that prevented other frequencies, especially red, from interfering with her work. God wasn't just using her as a channel. He was protecting her through the golden light, creating a kind of spiritual force field that kept interference at bay. But in 1978, something happened that would test this protection in a way she never imagined. During a service in Detroit, a man arrived dressed entirely in red, not just his shirt or tie, everything. Red shirt, red pants, red shoes, even a red hat. The people around him began to feel uncomfortable, but didn't know why. There was a subtle agitation in the air, an unease that seemed to grow as the service progressed. When Kathryn Kuhlman took the stage, she immediately felt the interference. The golden light around her began to flicker like a faulty light bulb, and for the first time in decades, she felt real resistance to connecting with the divine presence. She tried to continue the service normally, but things started to go wrong. A woman who was supposed to receive healing for arthritis ended up with more pain than before. A man seeking liberation from depression left more distressed. Prayers seemed to echo into the void, without their usual power. That's when Kathryn Kuhlman did something she had never done publicly. She stopped the service, asked for the lights to be dimmed, and explained to the entire congregation what was happening. There was spiritual interference in the environment, a frequency that was blocking the full manifestation of the divine presence. And she knew exactly what the source was. Without pointing directly at the man in red, she explained how certain colors can affect spiritual environments, how they can create barriers or open doors that should remain closed. And then she made a request. She asked that anyone wearing red consider covering up or changing their clothes, if possible, not out of superstition, but out of respect for the spiritual work being done. The man in red initially resisted, said it was absurd, that colors had no spiritual power, that God didn't care about something so superficial. But then something extraordinary happened. A child in the congregation, who had been quiet until then, began to cry. Not a normal cry, a cry of terror, as if she were seeing something terrifying that the adults couldn't perceive. The child's mother tried to calm her, but it was useless. The crying intensified, and then the child pointed directly at the man in red and screamed a word that chilled the blood of everyone present. "Shadow!" The man in red looked around and saw all eyes fixed on him. He saw the discomfort on people's faces. He felt the weight of the situation, and finally decided to leave. The moment he crossed the auditorium door, something incredible happened. The golden light around Kathryn Kuhlman not only returned to normal, it intensified like never before. The child stopped crying instantly and began to smile. The entire atmosphere changed, as if a spiritual storm had passed and now the sun could shine again. Kathryn Kuhlman restarted the service, and that night became one of the most powerful of her entire ministerial career. Dozens of healings occurred. People reported visions. The divine presence was so intense that many said they physically felt God's love enveloping them, all because a chromatic interference was removed from the environment. But the story doesn't end there. 3 days later, the man in red returned. But this time, he was dressed in white, and he brought with him a confession that would leave everyone speechless. He said that in recent years, he had developed a strange obsession with the color red. He couldn't wear other colors. He felt an inexplicable compulsion to dress only in red. And even more disturbing, he said he had started having strange dreams. Dreams where shadowy entities visited him and encouraged him to go to churches dressed in red. They said it would make him more powerful, spiritually. He had never connected these experiences until witnessing what happened at Kathryn Kuhlman's service. That night, when he left the auditorium, the dream stopped. The compulsion for red disappeared, and for the first time in years, he felt peace in his mind. Kathryn Kuhlman prayed for him, and when she finished the prayer, something extraordinary happened once again. The golden light surrounding her expanded and also enveloped the man, as if it were sealing a spiritual protection around him. He never had those dreams again. Never again felt the compulsion to wear red in spiritual contexts, and he became one of the most fervent defenders of Kathryn Kuhlman's teachings on the influence of colors in spiritual life. Now you may be wondering, does this mean that red is a bad color? No, not exactly. Red has its place and its function in the divine plan. It is the color of passion, of human love, of vital force. It is beautiful and necessary in its appropriate contexts. But in specific spiritual contexts, especially during ministry and prayer, it can act as interference, as a frequency that competes with the divine frequencies that are trying to manifest. It's like trying to meditate next to loud music. The music isn't bad in itself, but in the context of meditation, it becomes a distraction that prevents deep connection. Kathryn Kuhlman understood this, and that's why she made the conscious choice to create spiritually optimized environments for divine manifestation. But there's an even deeper dimension to this revelation, a dimension that she discovered only in the last months of her life. In 1976, a few months before her passing, Kathryn Kuhlman had her last great spiritual vision. In this vision, she saw the complete truth about colors and their influence in the spiritual world. She saw that each color is, literally, a word in the divine vocabulary, a form of communication between heaven and earth. White represents purity, a direct connection to the divine. Gold represents protection, the manifestation of celestial glory. Blue represents peace, spiritual healing. Green represents growth and renewal. And red represents choice. The choice between human will and divine will, between the ego and surrender, between personal power and the power that comes from above. In secular contexts, this choice is natural and necessary. We need the fire of human passion, personal determination, individual willpower. But in contexts of spiritual ministry, when the goal is to be a pure channel for divine manifestation, this energy of choice can create conflict. It can divide the focus between what I want to happen and what God wants to happen. And Kathryn Kuhlman realized that her mission was to be a channel completely surrendered to the divine will. Therefore, she consciously avoided anything that might reintroduce the energy of personal choice into her services. This wasn't superstition. It was profound spiritual wisdom. Have you ever noticed how some people pray in a way that you feel their prayers really reach heaven, while other people, even if sincere, seem like their prayers get stuck at the ceiling? The difference often lies in the level of surrender, in the ability to become a pure channel, without interference from the ego or personal will. And Kathryn Kuhlman discovered that even seemingly insignificant elements, like the color of an outfit, can influence this level of surrender and spiritual purity. In her later services, she began to wear exclusively white and gold, and the results were extraordinary. The divine presence manifested with an intensity and purity that impressed even those who had followed her for decades. It was as if she had found the exact frequency to perfectly tune in with the kingdom of God. And when she passed away in 1976, many said they saw a golden light rising from the place where she had transitioned. A light that seemed to carry not only her soul, but all the wisdom she had accumulated on how to harmonize the physical world with the spiritual. Today, decades later, many spiritual leaders around the world discreetly apply the principles that Kathryn Kuhlman discovered about colors and their influence on spirituality, not out of superstition, but because they understood that God works through all aspects of creation, including light and its colored frequencies. And perhaps the real lesson of Kathryn Kuhlman's story isn't specifically about avoiding red. Perhaps it's about paying attention to the subtle details that God uses to guide and protect us, about being sensitive to the influences that can distance us from pure connection with the divine, about having the humility to recognize that even our choice of colors can reflect the state of our soul. How many times do you automatically choose certain colors without stopping to think about what they might be communicating about your inner state? How many times have you entered environments and felt unease or peace without connecting this to the visual frequencies around you? Kathryn Kuhlman taught us that true spirituality doesn't only happen in grand gestures and eloquent prayers. It also manifests in the most subtle details, in the sensitivity to the frequencies that surround us, in the conscious choice to create environments that foster connection with the sacred. And if she was right about the spiritual power of colors, imagine how many other subtle influences exist in our lives that may be affecting our connection with the divine without us realizing it. Perhaps the true color that Kathryn Kuhlman taught us to avoid isn't physical red. Perhaps it's symbolic red, the color of the ego that insists on competing with God for the direction of our lives, the color of self-will that resists complete surrender, the color of spiritual pride that makes us think we know better than the Creator. And perhaps, when we can remove this chromatic interference from our souls, we too can become pure channels for the manifestation of the divine golden light in our own lives. After all, each of us has the potential to be a Kathryn Kuhlman in our sphere of influence. Each of us can learn to tune into celestial frequencies and allow the glory of God to manifest through our existence. The question isn't whether colors have spiritual power. The question is, are you willing to pay attention to the subtle frequencies that may be influencing your connection with the sacred? Kathryn Kuhlman paid attention, and she changed the lives of millions of people through this spiritual sensitivity. And you? What color is dominating the frequency of your soul today?